In my decades of analyzing the human psyche at my clinic in Zurich, I observed a phenomenon so persistent, so deeply disturbing, that it caused me to radically question how we understand human relationships. A patient would come to me, broken, burdened by an unbearable weight of compliance, living entirely to satisfy the expectations of family, colleagues, or lovers. They were liked, yes, they were praised for their docility, their predictability, their absolute reliability, but inside, their soul was suffocating. Under my guidance, as we began the delicate work of psychological archaeology, something remarkable would happen. They would begin to integrate their disowned self. They would learn to say no. They would set a boundary. They would stop wearing the agreeable mask that society had demanded of them. And then, without exception, the catastrophe would occur. The very people who claimed to love them, the friends who praised their generosity, the family members who celebrated their loyalty, would suddenly, violently turn against them. It was not a gentle drift apart. It was an abrupt, bitter, almost hysterical hostility. For a long time, conventional psychiatry viewed this as a tragedy of communication, a mere misunderstanding between individuals evolving at different speeds. But when I sat across from my patients in Zurich, listening to the bitter tears of those who had dared to grow, I realized a disturbing truth. What modern psychology views as an unfortunate social friction, I recognized as advanced psychological architecture. People do not turn against you because you have changed for the worse. They turn against you because your transformation has shattered the invisible psychological contract upon which their own ego stability depended. When you change, you cease to play your assigned role in their unconscious drama, and in doing so, you force them to confront the very shadow they have spent a lifetime trying to avoid. If you have ever experienced this sudden, cold betrayal from those you thought were your closest allies, I invite you to listen carefully. What you are experiencing is not a failure of your character, but a fundamental law of the human mind. Understanding this will not only heal the pain of those lost connections, but it will force you to confront the unintegrated shadow lingering within your own relationships. Let me share with you the case of a patient who came to my clinic in 1924, a man named Marcus. Marcus was a highly successful corporate lawyer from Geneva, a man of immaculate manners, impeccably dressed, possessing what seemed to be an enviable social circle. Yet when he sat in the heavy leather chair across from me, his eyes carried the hollow, exhausted look of a man sentenced to life imprisonment. For 15 years, Marcus had been the emotional backbone of his social group and his extended family. Whenever a crisis arose, Marcus solved it. Whenever a financial shortfall occurred, Marcus quietly covered it. Whenever a friend needed a late-night confidant to dump their neuroses upon, Marcus listened with endless patience. He was, by all societal standards, a saint. But in the quiet privacy of our sessions, as we mapped his dreams and unraveled his affect-toned complexes, the truth emerged. Marcus was not acting out of pure love. He was acting out of a desperate, unconscious compulsion to be needed. His persona, the carefully crafted mask of the benevolent savior, was his only defense against a deep, terrifying fear of abandonment. I told Marcus that his saint's mask was killing him. It was starving his true self, preventing him from ever experiencing authentic connection. Over months of rigorous work, Marcus began the process of individuation. He began to withdraw his energy from those who merely consumed it. The test came on a crisp autumn afternoon. A longtime friend and business partner approached Marcus, expecting him to once again sign off on a questionable financial venture that carried immense risk for Marcus and all the reward for his partner. In the past, Marcus would have swallowed his anxiety and complied to keep the peace. This time, Marcus looked his friend in the eye and calmly said, "No, I cannot support this." What followed was extraordinary. The friend did not engage in a rational discussion. He did not ask Marcus why he felt this way. Instead, his face contorted into a mask of pure rage. Within 48 hours, this friend had contacted every mutual acquaintance in Geneva, declaring that Marcus had become cold, arrogant, dangerous, and mentally unstable. Friends of a decade stopped returning his calls. His family accused him of abandoning his duty. In a matter of weeks, the vast network of support Marcus had spent his entire life building collapsed like a house of cards. When Marcus returned to my office, he was shattered, convinced he had committed some unspeakable moral failure. I looked at him and said, "Marcus, you have not failed. You have simply stopped serving as the repository for their projected dependencies. You see, micro-expressions tell us everything the conscious mind tries to conceal." When Marcus said no, his friend experienced a sudden, violent micro-expression, a tightening of the jaw, a dilation of the pupils, a sudden flinching of the eyes. It was not the reaction of a friend who was disappointed. It was the visceral panic of a parasite whose host had suddenly developed an immune response. If you are listening to my voice right now, and you have felt this sudden, terrifying isolation after choosing to honor your own truth, I want you to anchor this moment in your mind. Leave this sentence in the comments below as a testament to your own psychological awakenings. I am no longer the keeper of other people's illusions. When a person undergoes true psychological differentiation, the first structure to collapse is the shared unconscious equilibrium. Every group, whether it is a family, a friendship circle, or a workplace, functions as a delicate ecosystem held together by unspoken projections. You are assigned a role. You may be the fixer, the victim, the quiet one, the scapegoat, or the reliable anchor. So long as you remain within the parameters of that assigned identity, the group experiences a comforting illusion of harmony. But this harmony is a lie. It is what I call a participation mystique, a primitive psychological identity where individual boundaries are blurred to maintain collective comfort. The breakdown occurs during what I term the pressure event. Pressure does not create new flaws in a relationship, it merely illuminates the fractures that were already present under the surface. When you begin to change, when you reclaim your disowned energy and step out of your assigned role, you exert immense psychological pressure on the entire system. Suddenly, the mask worn by those around you begins to crack. I have observed that people react to your transformation in one of two ways. An integrated, self-aware individual will look at your growth, feel a momentary discomfort, but ultimately adjust their expectations, respecting your newly established boundaries. They possess what I call differentiated consciousness, the ability to see you as a separate, complex human being, rather than an instrument for their own gratification. However, the vast majority of people operate from a state of unintegrated projection. When you change, their persona undergoes a catastrophic breakdown. Because they relied on your predictability to regulate their own fragile ego architecture, your evolution feels to them like an act of unspeakable betrayal. They do not see your growth as a positive step toward health. They perceive it as a direct threat to their security. They exhibit what I call selective empathy. They loved you only when your suffering or your compliance served a purpose in their internal narrative. The moment your well-being requires them to adapt, their empathy vanishes, replaced by a cold, calculating hostility. They will attempt to guilt you back into submission. They will accuse you of changing, of becoming selfish, of forgetting where you came from. What they are actually saying, if you translate their unconscious code, is this: how dare you break the agreement that allowed me to avoid facing my own psychological stagnation? If you have witnessed this mask fall from the faces of those you once trusted, understand that this shedding of illusions is necessary for your survival. Write these words in the comments below to affirm your stance. I release the obligation to remain who I used to be. To truly comprehend why people turn against you when you change, we must explore the deepest levels of the human mind, the architecture of the psyche itself. In my lifelong research into the structure of the unconscious, I identified several fundamental components that dictate human behavior: the ego, the persona, the shadow, and the process of individuation. The ego is the center of our conscious awareness, the fragile island floating on a vast, turbulent ocean of the unconscious. To survive in society, the ego constructs the persona, a Latin word meaning mask. The persona is necessary. It allows us to perform our social duties, to interact politely, to navigate the expectations of the collective. But the danger arises when an individual identifies completely with their persona, forgetting that there is a vast, unacknowledged realm living beneath it. That unacknowledged realm is the shadow. The shadow contains all those parts of ourselves that we have deemed unacceptable, shameful, or dangerous: our aggression, our wild creativity, our deep desires, and our unvarnished truth. Whenever a culture or a social circle demands absolute conformity, the shadow grows darker, denser, and more volatile. Now, observe what happens when you decide to change. When you embark on the path of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming the unique individual you were truly meant to be, you are forced to meet your shadow. You must integrate your disowned power, your capacity to say no, your righteous anger, and your independent will. As you integrate these elements, your personal energy changes. You no longer emit the subtle frequency of a victim or a compliant servant. You step into authority over your own life, and it is precisely this authority that triggers the unintegrated shadow in those around you. This dynamic operates through three distinct shadow traps that govern how human beings react to another person's transformation. The first trap is projection mapping. When an individual has spent their entire life repressing their own power, their own boundaries, and their own desire for freedom, seeing you reclaim yours creates unbearable internal friction. They cannot consciously admit that they are envious of your courage, because doing so would force them to acknowledge their own cowardice. Therefore, their mind employs a defense mechanism. They take their own repressed self-hatred and project it onto you. You are no longer a friend who is growing. You become, in their mind, an arrogant, selfish, and treacherous traitor. They attack in you the very courage they lack in themselves. The second trap is the threat to the collective myth. Every family and social group operates on a shared myth, a narrative that justifies their current state of being. It might be the myth that our family is just unlucky, or people like us never succeed, or relationships are always miserable. When you break free from this myth by transforming your life, you become a living contradiction to their foundational beliefs. Your success proves that their limitations are not absolute truths, but choices born of fear. Your growth strips away their excuses. To protect their collective myth, they must brand you as an outcast, a lunatic, or an enemy. They must convince themselves that you have failed, so that they can remain comfortably asleep in their own stagnation. The third trap is the collapse of narcissistic supply. Many human relationships are built not on mutual love, but on an unconscious transactional economy. Unintegrated individuals frequently seek out compliant, highly empathetic partners or friends to serve as a constant source of validation, what modern language might refer to as a narcissistic supply. When you change, you close the vault. You stop providing the endless validation, the unearned forgiveness, and the silent tolerance of their bad behavior. The collapse of this supply triggers an acute narcissistic injury. Deprived of the fuel they relied upon, their affection turns into immediate, sharp hostility. They turn against you not because you harmed them, but because you stopped allowing them to exploit you. As I have written throughout my career, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. If you do not understand these three shadow traps, you will fall into the tragic trap of trying to repair relationships that were built on the condition of your perpetual limitation. How then do you navigate this harrowing reality in your everyday life? It is not enough to understand these principles intellectually. You must apply them as a practical test to evaluate the authenticity of your human connections. I offer you a diagnostic method that you can implement immediately across the three primary domains of your existence. The first domain is romantic relationships. When you begin to change, whether by adopting new health habits, pursuing a passionate career, or demanding deeper emotional intimacy, observe your partner's subtle reactions. Do they celebrate your milestone with genuine warmth in their eyes, or is their congratulations accompanied by a faint, tight-lipped smile, and an immediate attempt to redirect attention back to themselves. A partner who is invested in your true self will feel challenged by your growth, yet they will use that challenge as a catalyst for their own evolution. Conversely, a partner who is attached merely to your persona will attempt to undermine your progress through subtle sabotage, backhanded compliments, or emotional withdrawal. They want the old, controllable version of you back because that is the only version their fragile ego knows how to manage. The second domain is the workplace and social systems. In professional environments, hierarchy and predictability are often prized above authenticity. When you step into a higher level of confidence, setting clear boundaries regarding your time and energy, observe how your colleagues respond. Those who relied on your overextension to cover their own deficiencies will immediately label you as uncooperative or difficult. You must learn to practice strategic awareness. Do not enter into emotional debates with those who resent your boundaries. Speak with calm, unshakable brevity. Understand that in a corporate or social system, your boundary is not a negotiation. It is a statement of reality. As I often reminded my students, you do not destroy a shadow by fighting it. You destroy it by shining a clearer light upon your own center. The third domain is private self-reflection, the sanctuary of your inner life. You must conduct a ruthless inventory of your own motives, using active imagination or reflective journaling. Sit in a quiet room, take up your pen, and ask yourself this profound question. Where in my life am I still holding on to toxic connections simply because I'm afraid to bear the weight of my own isolation? You must examine whether you are subtly inviting people to turn against you by acting out a self-defeating martyr complex. Individuation requires absolute honesty with oneself. You cannot claim to be a victim of other people's hostility if you continue to return to the very wells you know are poisoned. Now, I must deliver a stern warning to you, for knowledge of the human psyche is a dangerous weapon if wielded by an unintegrated ego. As you learn to recognize why people turn against you, there is a profound temptation to become what I call a shadow hunter, a person who uses psychological terminology to judge, dismiss, and look down upon others. You may be tempted to look at those who have betrayed or abandoned you and brand them as narcissists, undeveloped souls, or weak-minded fools. I urge you, with all the conviction of my clinical experience, to resist this temptation. Arrogance is merely the persona's defense mechanism against deeper insecurity. If you use my concepts to place yourself above those who have turned against you, you have fallen into the very trap of the shadow that you seek to escape. This brings us to what I call the mirror effect. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When someone turns against you because you have changed, ask yourself, where in your own past have you turned against someone else for changing? Where have you felt that sudden, sharp sting of resentment when a friend, a child, or a partner outgrew a dynamic that was comfortable for you? You must recognize that the potential for betrayal, for envy, and for psychological projection exists within your own unconscious as well. The goal of individuation is not to make yourself superior to others, but to make yourself conscious of your own capacity for darkness so that you may consciously choose the light. When people turn against you because you have stepped into your truth, do not view it as a tragedy. View it as a profound, necessary act of purification. The collapse of these false connections is the price you pay for the reclamation of your own soul. The people who leave your life during your transformation were never truly attached to you. They were attached to your compliance. Their departure opens up the necessary psychological space for authentic human beings to enter. Individuals who will love you not for the mask you wear, but for the depth of the self you have dared to integrate. As you step forward from this moment, remember that the journey of individuation is not a comfortable walk in a sunny garden. It is a descent into the depths, requiring immense courage, solitude, and unwavering faith in your own inner compass. Do not fear the withdrawal of the crowd. Do not mourn the breaking of illusions that were built on your silence. Stand firm in the reality of who you are becoming. For as I have learned in my long journey through the labyrinth of the human soul, The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Accept yourself, integrate your shadow, walk your path with absolute integrity, and let the world adapt to the light you dare to shine.